I'm Justine Rosenthal, editor of The National Interest. We are here today with Dimitri Symes, president of the Nixon Center and publisher of The National Interest. Thank you for being with us, Dimitri.
Thank you for having me.
We are going to be discussing the recent Russia-US summit. Let's just start point blank, out of 10, how much progress was made?
Well, probably about 4, but let me say this. Neither side had very high expectations, and it was genuine progress, modest but genuine. And taking into account a number of previous summits where considerable damage was done, by that not very demanding standard, I think something useful was accomplished.
Who got more out of this, the Russians or the United States?
Oh, definitely the United States. It wasn't very much, but the only genuine concession at this point made by either side was the Russian agreement to allow US overflights of the Russian territory to bring military supplies and, if necessary, even troops to Afghanistan. Afghanistan being a huge national security priority for the United States. This is an accomplishment. Let me say, however, that the Russians, they're a little sneaky. So they made this concession without any conditions. But there is a time bomb. They got a promise from the United States that they, being the Russians, would be entitled to inspect any US flight if they believe that there are things on this flight which do not reflect quote-unquote Russian specifications, what is supposed to be on this flight according to a flight declaration. So if the Russians are in a bad mood, and if they want to demonstrate their displeasure, they can use this provision to start inspecting US flights. And I'm sure the United States would not comply with that, certainly not on a regular basis. So the Russians would be able to stop these overflights at will for whichever reason.
Does that not also mean, though, that they could ratchet up tensions to a level that we potentially haven't seen them at since the recent Georgian conflict?
I don't think the Russians would want to increase tensions intentionally, and actually I think they would like to reduce tensions. But the Russians have demonstrated that if they are unhappy with somebody, they know how to find an excuse to demonstrate their displeasure. They have sanitary inspection in Russia, which is somehow very, very powerful. Whenever Russia has a problem with the country, the sanitary inspection would discover that the mineral water is of a low quality, that the milk, the fruit is not up to specifications. And in this case, of course, they have a mechanism to monitor US overflights.
And what would be a potential US trespass that would make the Russians want to use this?
Well, most likely, of course, something that would happen in the so-called near abroad, in the area where former Soviet republics are, now newly independent states, most of whom do not have a very good relationship with Russia. But of course, the most difficult relationship is between Russia and Georgia, because Georgia insists on its territorial integrity, and this is being fully supported by the United States. But Georgian definition of territorial integrity includes Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which Georgia lost last August after Georgian attack on Russian peacekeepers located in South Ossetia. So these two territories, they are now officially independent republics as far as Russia is concerned. Nobody else recognizes their independence. There are Russian troops there. And if Mr. Saakashvili will try any new military action, I think the situation may prove to be quite explosive again.
And why do you think that no one else except for the Russians acknowledge their independence? I mean, do you think that all the other countries of the world are unjustified? Who's right and who's wrong in this?
Well, I can give you two answers. The first is pretty simple, because they are not independent. They are not independent by any reasonable definition of independence, and the Russians know that, and I think that there is very little pretense that these are truly independent countries. But then also, of course, the United States, NATO, the European Union, took a position when we championed the independence of Kosovo from Serbia, that this would not become any kind of a precedent. And the Russians used it as a precedent for Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And I think it's a matter of certain principle and indeed certain pride for NATO to make sure that we would not recognize that the Russians have called our bluff and have succeeded. I think that we want to demonstrate that if a nation like Georgia is allied with the United States, sends Georgian troops to Iraq, that this nation can count at least on our, what I would say, symbolic support.
And that is really all they got, that was symbolic support.
Well, they got a lot of money, but they did not get any kind of military assistance, which would give them a reasonable chance to reconquer Abkhazia and South Ossetia. I talked to officials on both sides about discussions in Moscow, and I think that Mr. Putin made it very graphic in his discussion with President Obama that should there be a new attack on Russian forces in South Ossetia, all the bets would be off, and then President Saakashvili cannot take anything for granted, including the very survival of his government.
Do you think, though, that now the American government or the new administration has wised up to Saakashvili's strategies and that there would be much less misunderstanding about what happened or in a next attack?
I think the new administration definitely wised up. Even the Bush administration understood in August 2008 that Saakashvili was out of control and had his own way to interpret American support and to confuse sympathy with a willingness to go and take a stand on his behalf. I also think that President Saakashvili, as unstable as he sometimes is, also have wised up, and he does understand that if there would be military hostility in Georgia, he may get a great deal of sympathy. Russia would be squarely denounced, but it would not help him to survive politically.
Let's talk a little more about the near abroad, not just Georgia. I mean, we have Georgia, we have Ukraine, we have the ballistic missile defense in Poland. Do you think that Russia is being realistic about what seems to be a reassertion of its claims of a sphere of influence and its rights to a sphere of influence?
Russia has no sphere of influence. They may dream about that, they may be nostalgic about it, but just let's look at what is happening. With an exception of Georgia, they did not have a military confrontation with any other country, and I think that the armed forces are not up to the mission of rebuilding the Soviet Union. And if you would look at the neighbors, they are either unfriendly to Russia, or how to put it, they are a little bit for sale. They are prepared to manipulate their ability to build a relationship with Russia to get more from the United States and the European Union. But you don't see many genuine allies. Two countries which are considered closest to Russia in the post-Soviet space are Armenia and Belarus. Armenia, however, just gave President Saakashvili the highest Armenian decoration, just for the fact that President Saakashvili came to the capital Yerevan and is not interfering any longer with supplies of Russian gas to Armenia across his territory. And with Belarus, Russia efficiently has a union with Belarus, but it's a very troubled relationship, and President Lukashenko makes it very clear that if the West is prepared to play ball with him, not interfering in his authoritarian ways, he is a game. So I don't think that the Russians have any way of dominating post-Soviet space. There is a lot of wishful thinking on their part, there is a lot of bravado, but the most they can hope for before they make their model of development truly attractive, the most they can hope for under current circumstances is to avoid Western containment, namely that we would not try kind of to push them back and not to allow them to enjoy any presence in the post-Soviet space. But Russian sphere of influence is not in the making, they have no capability of that.
And do you think that we are successfully or even attempting to really push them back?
I think that we push them back successfully on a number of occasions, and sometimes it's fully justified, as when we have done recently in the case of air base in Kyrgyzstan, in Manas, which the Russians clearly have encouraged the Kyrgyz government to close. And how to put it? We managed to be more persuasive with some major financial sweetness to persuade the Kyrgyz government to reconsider their decision and to allow this base to be used by the United States. This base is quite important for US operations in Afghanistan. When, however, we tried to play a major role in domestic affairs of Russian neighbors, particularly those of them who are not yet in NATO, it often was counterproductive. It only encouraged the Russians to interfere on their own, and we, as a result, normally did not get pro-Western democracy, but an area of instability.